All right. So you are done with the definitional essay. We get to start a new unit. This is called the Investigative Report, or more informally, the interview paper. For this paper, you are going to get a hold of someone who is 2 generations older than you. So not necessarily your parents' age, but a grandparent age. And you're going to talk to that person about their life and the society and community that they grew up in. And you're going to learn about it, and then you are going to research to find out how they fit in with other people from other communities of their time. For example, if they tell you they got married at 19, you can find out how many people at that time were getting married at 19 if you think that's pretty, common. And you get to spend about an hour just talking to them and enjoying them. I am not requiring it to be in person this year because I think there are some precautions that we can take. And if you need to talk to them over FaceTime or the phone or Zoom or just do an audio interview, I will totally understand that. I prefer for it to be in person because that's, the most meaningful and enjoyable. But I also understand wanting to make sure that we're being careful with people who are elderly during this time. So that is the first part there. So basically, as I said, this is the investigative report. You are going to write an essay that reads almost more like a magazine or a newspaper article about this person. The kinds of essays I'm talking about or that I think are interesting have intriguing, well-focused subjects. They're centered on a controlling theme. They're presented vividly with lots of details and proceed at an informative, entertaining pace. So you're going to ask your subject and controlling theme should be the answer to the question, how has society, how has community influenced the life of my interviewee? So answering that question will require that you look at the information in terms of gender, race, and class systems. And by that, I mean, what kind of job did they do, right? What kind of household did they grow up in? How many brothers and sisters do they have? Those are the kinds of things you're going to look at in order to research more about that time in history, right? So this is both a historical paper and an interview paper. What you're doing is actually really rather important. And every time I assign this paper, I say to my students, you're doing something significant here. You are recording first person history. You are taking down someone's story of what really happened, and you're getting an account of that. And the reason that's so significant, to me anyway, is because when I first started teaching this paper in 2008, my students were interviewing World War II vets. Now, there's very few World War II vets to even be interviewed. They even had, I think I had one student, I don't know if he had like someone who was born slightly after World War I or what, but definitely like someone who was about 101, 102 during that time. So when you're talking to people, you're writing down this first person history that might otherwise be lost. For example, Ariana Baskell, it's been a while now, but Ariana Baskell interviewed her grandmother, her great-grandmother, I believe, who was a World War II bride from Belgium. She only came to the United States speaking French. And so she took down her story of how she met her husband, how they married, how they ended up out here, right? I've had people talk to people who immigrated or who had parents who immigrated, people who didn't have running water, or people who just had a significant story to tell, and later they were glad that they had written it down because that person had passed. When I had Rachel Keller, her Aunt Faye was in the process of fighting cancer, and she was able to write down her story of being a single mother coming and moving to Ellis and getting a job at the cafe when she first came here, and how the community helped take care of her. And it was just it was significant, it was important, it was beautiful, and she'll always have that piece of history to write down and to remember and think about. I know Miss Hausler wrote about her grandmother, um, and she'll tell you about it and about the table that she sat around to talk to her about it. And that little piece of first person history is a bit of a treasure now. So I guess what I'm saying, not to put overly too much pressure on you, I guess what I'm saying is treat this assignment as personal, as significant, and as important work, not just as a paper for me. I highly recommend that you give a copy of this to whoever you interview. So, that being said, by the time you finish this assignment, you need to have analyzed your audience. Well, actually, you don't really have an audience. I'll talk to you about that in a second. You're going to research, you're going to do primary field research, which is interviewing. You're going to understand, synthesize, quote. You're going to integrate facts and descriptive details. You're going to make a works cited page. Yes, you will have a works cited page in this nice, lovely, warm paper. I will explain to you a little bit later about why that's not weird. I promise it'll be okay. So, when you're looking at the influence of society on your interviewee, you're also going to focus attention on their uniqueness. And that approach about what makes them unique, about what makes them interesting to you, are going to help you discover how they were shaped by their societies, how they were a product of their societies, or how they kind of bucked the norms and did something very different, right? One of my favorite papers of these I ever read was a young woman who was living in Manhattan. She didn't have any relatives nearby, but we had a partnership with the local retirement community. And she went to the retirement community to meet a stranger, basically, and get to know her and talk about her life. Turns out the person she talked to had traveled the entire world, and her room was covered in all of the things from her travels. And her best friend and her little dog had gone on a lot of these trips too. The best friend was right next door to corroborate the stories or to argue about them, either one. So you'll have an intriguing, well-focused subject. You're going to have a controlling theme. So it's not just writing this person's entire history, right? Like, you're not writing a book about them. You don't have time for that. You're going to focus in on those stories that are interesting or significant, or that show something significant or interesting about your person. You can't just have them go through their entire life and be like, oh yeah, let me write that entire thing down. It'd be nice to be able to do an autobiography, like a lengthy one, but you don't have time for that. So you're going to actually have to select the information you use, as opposed to the ones you can't. So your interviewee is your source. You're going to have, I'm saying, 2 other sources, right? The most fun part about this paper is that it is part creative writing. You need to have a vivid presentation. You need to particularize your subject rather than generalize about them. So instead of calling someone your grandma, which they are your grandma, of course, if you interview them, but making sure to use their first and last names. Help us to get to know them. Describe them in detail. What do they look like? What do they like to wear? One of my favorite descriptions is Reagan Krauss wrote about her grandmother, and she was wearing like a hot pink jumpsuit that said "Glama" in it, in like glittering rhinestones. And that image will never leave my head because it's hilarious. That's fantastic. So vivid presentations, really helping us to get to know that person. You're going to use direct quotations, right? I highly suggest, if your interviewee is willing to let you record, that you record so you can get those direct quotes down later. If you'd rather not, go ahead and just take a notebook, ask them to repeat it, and write down the quotes exactly as they say them, right? The important thing is that we hear their voice rather than yours when we read the paper. So it's informative and entertaining. This is like a feature article in in a magazine or publication, or what newspapers, particularly small local newspapers, might call a profile piece. We're writing a profile of this person and about something significant in their lives. So, and we'll organize and synthesize it into an easy to follow pattern and just enjoy it. We're going to learn about culture by consulting our elders. And yeah, you're going to get a lot of insight into that. Now, when I used to do this assignment, I referenced Capper's magazine as kind of like your audience of people, or like a nostalgia magazine. How many of you have even ever heard of Capper's Weekly or Capper's magazine? I thought the reference was lost. Okay, what about Reader's Digest? Any of you have a grandparent who had Reader's Digest in the bathroom or in the living room somewhere? Okay, what types of stories does Reader's Digest publish?
I just looked at the pictures.
So the types of things that they like to publish are nostalgia pieces, right? Things that refer to stuff from the past. I'm going to go to this home section. This is the Reader's Digest link. Home tips. I don't want home tips. I want like stories. Stories. True stories. Took me a while to find that. Love stories. Let's go do that. Let's try it out. This veteran found his long-lost love after 75 years. Oh my gosh. First of all, that sounds super sweet. Secondly, that's the kind of thing we're looking at. Not that, I mean, some of these are really clickbaity, but, and that's not necessarily what I'm looking for, but like an intriguing, well-focused subject. KT Robbins is 98, but his memory is sharper than ever. It's been 75 years since he was part of the 95th Baker's Battalion stationed in Bray, France during the Second World War. Robbins was happily married for 70 years, but before that, he had a romance that no one knew about, not even those closest to him. The sweet secret was discovered when Linda Tosh, Robbins' neighbor, and another friend found a photo among some belongings when they were helping him sort through his late wife's things. Robbins and his wife never had children, but Tosh says that she and a few other neighbors are like his daughters. She was like, "Hey, KT, who is she?" He knew instantly, she recalls. He said, "Oh my goodness, that's Jeannie Ann Guinea." Robbins gently interrupts, "She was my first love." So that is the idea of an intriguing, well-focused subject where we get some descriptions of who we're looking at. I really hope we can get some more clear stories. Group of teens on their surfboards saved 2 swimmers from drowning. That's interesting. Boy, these headlines are really clickbaity. I do not recommend titling your paper 13 Powerful Things Surviving a Terrorist Attack Taught Me About Life. Like, that's maybe not as personal as we would like it to be. Do feel free to give it a good title, but I guess keep in mind that you're not looking for clicks. You're just looking to tell someone's story and tell it right. Okay, so first thing you need to do, you need to choose an accessible interviewee. This person should be from a significantly different generation than you, approximately 40 years older than you if you're under 30, which you are. Show evidence of personal observation and thoughtful interviews. Offer readers the descriptive and sensory details to imagine the person you interview. Dramatized anecdotes, which are little stories, through specific narrative action, people moving, gesturing, talking. So it's not just that you're talking to the person, it's that you're watching how they talk, how they express themselves, when they let out a little laugh, when they use their own version of a swear. My grandmother, I never heard her swear, but oh my goodness, all the time. Goodness, oh my goodness, that was her thing. how do those things make their way in? You'll find at least one published source. I'm asking for two. You'll pace the flow of information in your report carefully. We're not going to talk about organizing yet because first of all, we got to talk about finding an interviewee. And lastly, you're going to ask yourself, how has society and community influenced the life of my interviewee? So we're going to do some brainstorming today about who you might want to interview. So we're going to look at people you know who are in that appropriate age range. If you want, you actually can interview one person as a small group, 3 to 4 people. That's okay to do. It's okay if you have the same person. You're not going to write the same paper. Trust me. Even if you get the exact same interview, you will find that each person has the kinds of things they enjoy and pick out. Consider other people who your parents would suggest you interview, or people like coworkers, religious leaders, teachers. They can all give you really good ideas. You can also brainstorm places where you might be able to go to find out about potential interview sources. So that's the first thing we're doing today is we're going to try to figure out who we're going to interview. Then I'd like you to write a small script, like call them, ask them, when could we possibly set up an interview? And I want you to set up that interview within the next week. We have a long weekend, and I will give you through next week to start your interview. You will find that this project, we pace it according to where you are at. So if you haven't done your interview yet, you can actually start beginning your research, or you can write questions instead. If you've completed the interview, you can work on transcripting and other things. You all are going to be in a different spot with this paper for the next 2 weeks or so. But your interview will be due next Friday. So we'll start there. Tomorrow we are going to write starter questions together, come up with a bunch of questions as a group.